Hello, dear friends and fellow literature enthusiasts. I'm so glad you've joined me today because we're about to dive into a cinematic experience that, for me, resonated in ways I didn't anticipate. Before we get started, I'd like to invite you, with genuine sincerity, to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy our deep dives into the narrative and aesthetic heart of films. I promise, this isn't just about flashy spectacle or surface-level commentary. This is a place where we explore cinema thoughtfully, connecting story, theme, and human experience, as one might do with a cherished novel. And to be perfectly transparent, today's discussion isn't a conventional review. Eddington 2025 doesn't exist in reality. What we are doing is a deeply intellectual, theoretical, and critical analysis, an exercise in imagination, reflection, and education aimed primarily at audiences who love literature, storytelling, and cinematic artistry. So, if you're here to explore story architecture, character depth, and thematic resonance, you're in the right place. I first encountered the concept of this film in a conversation about narrative tension and human ambition. What struck me immediately was its layering of personal drama over a cosmic canvas, a juxtaposition that has always fascinated me, both in literature and in film. It's rare to see a story that operates simultaneously on intimate, emotional levels and vast, existential ones. In my own life, I've often found that moments of quiet introspection, a solitary walk, an unexpected act of kindness, a sudden realization, carry as much weight as the external events that swirl around us. This film, I felt, would explore that balance. The individual against the immensity of circumstance and the small acts of courage that ripple outward. From the outset, the opening sequence establishes a tone that is both contemplative and immersive. It begins in a dimly lit observatory with a protagonist, a brilliant yet introspective scientist named Dr. Elias Eddington, pores over a series of complex charts and celestial diagrams. The camera lingers in a way that encourages reflection, much like the pacing of a literary novel. There's a quiet rhythm here, the soft hum of machinery, the flutter of papers, the subtle play of light across the protagonist's thoughtful face that conveys intelligence, curiosity, and a hint of melancholy. For me, this moment resonated because it reminded me of my own late-night explorations of books and ideas, when the world outside seems still and all that exists is the tension between thought and possibility. The film's visual and narrative style is immediately engaging. While some cinematic experiences feel like a series of disconnected events strung together by spectacle, this one is carefully constructed. Every frame, every movement, and even every pause feels purposeful. The cityscapes, observatories, and laboratory interiors aren't merely sets. They are extensions of character and theme. There's an interplay between space and psyche, where architecture, light, and shadow reflect internal dilemmas. I was particularly taken by how the environments echoed Dr. Eddington's mind, structured yet full of hidden pathways, precise yet susceptible to chaos. For a literature enthusiast, it's akin to entering a novel whose setting is as psychologically loaded as its characters. The story itself, in its early act, introduces a tension that is both intellectual and emotional. Dr. Eddington is engaged in pioneering work that promises to redefine understanding of time and space. At the same time, he grapples with unresolved personal relationships, ethical quandaries, and the haunting legacy of past mistakes. The film balances these strands beautifully. Scientific discovery is thrilling, yes, but it is never divorced from the human experience of risk, responsibility, and desire. Watching this, I was reminded of certain novels where ambition and morality are inseparable, and the narrative tension arises precisely from that entanglement. The film invites us to consider not only what it means to achieve, but what it costs to pursue knowledge without reckoning with personal or ethical consequences. As the plot unfolds, key secondary characters emerge, each intricately connected to Dr. Eddington's journey. There's Dr. Mara Lang, a physicist whose brilliance matches and challenges Elias's own. She is cautious, morally grounded, and often acts as the narrative conscience. Then there's Rian Voss, a charismatic industrialist whose resources and influence introduce a constant tension between vision and pragmatism, ethics and ambition. Each character feels meticulously crafted, not simply as a narrative device, but as a locus of philosophical and emotional inquiry. For me, their interactions illuminated aspects of my own understanding of collaboration, trust, and the delicate interplay between intellect and conscience. The plot's inciting incident involves the detection of an anomalous cosmic phenomenon, a temporal fluctuation that defies existing theoretical models. This discovery sets in motion a series of events that are at once thrilling and deeply contemplative. The narrative structure cleverly alternates between macro-level exploration, the mystery and potential consequences of the anomaly, and micro-level character development, focusing on the personal stakes for Elias, Mara, and Rian. I was particularly fascinated by this oscillation, as it mirrors the rhythm of certain novels that interweave large-scale existential themes with intimate human moments. The film seems to ask, how do we negotiate our personal responsibilities when faced with forces larger than ourselves? The tension is heightened by ethical dilemmas and interpersonal friction. Elias's discoveries carry the potential for extraordinary advancement, but also unforeseen risk. Should knowledge be pursued when its consequences are unpredictable? Can ambition justify jeopardizing the lives of others, or the stability of a society that cannot comprehend the stakes? These questions are woven seamlessly into dialogue, action, and even subtle visual cues. I found myself reflecting on moments in my own life where ambition or curiosity intersected with ethical boundaries, and how small choices reverberate beyond immediate perception. The film, in this sense, is almost meditative, prompting introspection alongside cinematic engagement. Pacing is another remarkable feature. Rather than relying solely on explosive spectacle to maintain momentum, the film balances quiet, reflective sequences with moments of high tension. There is a scene early on in which Elias and Mara discuss the implications of their findings in the dim glow of a lab, interrupted only by a cascading sequence of alerts from instruments. The scene's intensity is entirely cognitive and emotional, yet it grips as firmly as any physical confrontation. I was captivated by this technique because it demonstrates that suspense need not be externalized. It can reside in thought, dialogue, and the anticipation of consequence. The film also incorporates subtle narrative foreshadowing. Early visual motifs, reflections in glass, the oscillation of pendulums, constellations aligning in specific patterns, hint at later revelations. These are not heavy-handed clues, but understated threads that reward attentive viewers. As someone who enjoys literary puzzles and interwoven symbolism, I found this deeply satisfying. The filmmakers trust the audience to observe, reflect, and infer, rather than relying on overt exposition. This approach cultivates intellectual engagement and emotional investment simultaneously. By the midpoint, the stakes escalate both scientifically and personally. A significant experiment brings Elias face-to-face with the consequences of manipulating temporal variables. Unexpected disruptions occur, ethical boundaries are tested, and the tension between rational calculation and emotional intuition comes to the forefront. I was particularly drawn to a sequence in which the laboratory's instruments spiral into disarray, yet the framing, lighting, and sound combine to convey Elias's internal struggle with exquisite subtlety. The chaos is both literal and metaphorical, demonstrating how cinematic technique can articulate internal states without verbalization, a lesson in visual storytelling that resonates with literary sensibilities. Twists and revelations are carefully layered, avoiding shock for its own sake. The narrative foreshadows a pivotal ethical dilemma: the potential for a temporal experiment to save or destroy, with moral responsibility resting squarely on the protagonist. The tension arises not merely from uncertainty of outcome, but from the anticipation of human choice in the face of immense power. For me, This underscores why the film resonates on a philosophical level. It is an exploration of agency, responsibility, and consequence framed within an intellectually rich narrative. The relationships between characters are illuminated through both dialogue and subtle cinematic cues. A glance, a pause, or a shift in spatial positioning conveys emotional subtext as powerfully as any monologue. Mara's quiet skepticism, Rian's subtle manipulation, and Elias's oscillation between confidence and doubt are all expressed through visual and performative nuance. I found myself drawn into these interactions, reflecting on my own experiences with trust, collaboration, and ethical tension, and recognizing how narrative and human psychology are intertwined. By the climactic sequences, the film masterfully integrates science, ethics, and human emotion. The temporal anomaly reaches a critical threshold, demanding decisive action from Elias and his colleagues. The stakes are existential, yet the resolution remains grounded in character, morality, and reflection. The suspense is palpable, yet it is intellectual and emotional rather than purely kinetic. I found this balance extraordinary, a film that respects the audience's capacity for critical thought, ethical reflection, and emotional resonance. Throughout, the cinematography and sound design work in harmony with narrative and thematic content. Subtle cues in lighting, framing, and ambient sound emphasize tension, moral ambiguity, and temporal dislocation. A slow tracking shot across a dimly lit lab, punctuated by the rhythmic hum of instruments, conveys both the grandeur of discovery and the fragility of human endeavor. These elements are not mere decoration, but integral to meaning, reinforcing the notion that cinematic form and narrative content are inseparable. The film concludes on a note that is simultaneously satisfying and contemplative. Major plot threads are resolved, yet thematic and philosophical questions remain. Elias's choices and their consequences prompt reflection on the nature of knowledge, responsibility, and the human capacity for both insight and error. I found myself lingering on the final frame long after the credits, contemplating the interplay of ambition, ethics, and human connection, a testament to the film's capacity to resonate beyond immediate spectacle. In teasing the film's key elements, it's worth noting that intellectual rigor, ethical reflection, and visual storytelling are as central as plot twists or narrative surprises. The anomaly, the experiments, and the personal dynamics are all interwoven, forming a tapestry that rewards close attention and repeated reflection. For those who love literature and thoughtful analysis, this approach is particularly satisfying. The story is not only experienced, but interpreted, questioned, and pondered in layers that extend beyond the screen. In closing, the experience of engaging with this film, even in theoretical, imaginative terms, felt deeply personal. It resonates with the human condition, with the tension between curiosity and responsibility, ambition and morality, intellect and emotion. For me, it recalled late nights reading philosophical treatises or dense scientific essays, where ideas unfold gradually, challenging assumptions and illuminating unexpected connections. Watching this narrative unfold, even in my mind's eye, I felt that same sense of wonder, reflection, and emotional engagement. So, my friends, as we conclude this introduction to Eddington 2025, I encourage you to think not only about the plot or the spectacle, but about the questions it raises. What are the limits of knowledge? How do we navigate ethical responsibility in the face of uncertainty? And how do human relationships endure, shift, or fracture when confronted with forces beyond comprehension? These are not questions with simple answers, and the film wisely refrains from offering them. Instead, it invites us to reflect, to imagine, and to engage intellectually, emotionally, and morally. If this exploration resonated with you, I'd love for you to like the video and subscribe as we continue our journey through narrative, theme, and cinematic artistry. In the coming discussions, we'll delve deeper into the plot, examine character motivations, unpack the ethical dilemmas, and explore the cinematic techniques that make this film a rich subject for reflection. For those of us who approach movies with a literary sensibility, this is not simply entertainment. It is an invitation to think, to feel, and to connect ideas across disciplines, experiences, and imagination. The story begins in quiet contemplation, a tone that immediately signals this is a film that cares deeply about the internal life of its characters. Dr. Elias Eddington, our protagonist, is introduced in his private observatory, surrounded by instruments of extraordinary sophistication. The opening sequence is deceptively calm. Charts, monitors, and celestial diagrams flicker under dim, atmospheric lighting, and Elias moves deliberately between them, his mind engaged in calculations and hypotheses that promise discoveries far beyond ordinary comprehension. What struck me, even from the first moments, is how this setting mirrors his own cognitive processes, precise, layered, and aware of patterns, yet constantly on the verge of insight. It is an environment that demands attention, and the film allows the viewer to absorb it at its own contemplative pace, inviting us into Elias's meticulous, often solitary, world. The narrative tension begins subtly, with the first hints of anomaly in the cosmos. Elias notices temporal fluctuations, irregularities in the fabric of time that defy established models. The sequence is delicate yet suspenseful. Instruments beep, a monitor flickers, and a sudden jolt of awareness passes across Elias's face. It is in this careful interplay of observation, reaction, and environment that the film establishes its intellectual and emotional stakes. From a literary perspective, it mirrors the slow build of a novel's inciting incident, where the protagonist encounters the first inklings of conflict that will ripple outward. Early on, we are introduced to Dr. Mara Lang, whose presence provides both intellectual challenge and moral grounding for Elias. Their initial interactions are layered with tension and subtle admiration. Mara's expertise is formidable. She questions assumptions Elias might take for granted, probing both scientific method and ethical implications. There is a beautifully understated scene where she gently challenges a conclusion Elias has drawn, and rather than bristle, he listens, a moment that communicates respect, mutual intellect, and the early stirrings of emotional connection. This dynamic is crucial, as it establishes both collaborative tension and relational stakes that will reverberate through the narrative. The first act carefully balances scientific exploration with personal insight. Elias's private life, fragments of letters, photographs, and a subtle allusion to a fractured relationship, provides context for his drive and isolation. He is portrayed not merely as a scientist, but as a human being grappling with ambition, regret, and responsibility. In one memorable early scene, he pauses over a photograph of a loved one while instruments hum in the background. The juxtaposition is quiet yet profoundly affecting. It communicates the cost of devotion to knowledge and the tension between personal attachment and professional pursuit. The inciting incident that propels the narrative occurs when Elias and Mara detect a pattern within the anomaly, a temporal fluctuation that could theoretically be harnessed for unprecedented discovery. Here, the narrative skillfully escalates tension without resorting to overt spectacle. The sequences are methodical, showing their calculations, simulations, and debates over ethical implications. The suspense arises from intellectual stakes. What would happen if the anomaly were to behave unpredictably? What moral responsibility accompanies such discovery? For viewers with a literary mindset, this is compelling because the tension resides as much in ideas as in action. Rien Voss, the industrialist whose resources and influence become central, is introduced with flair. His charisma is palpable, and his entrance is carefully choreographed to contrast with the contemplative, cerebral atmosphere of Elias's observatory. Voss represents ambition unbound by caution. He sees opportunity in the anomaly and is willing to pursue it with minimal regard for consequences. Early interactions between Voss and Elias are charged, a battle of intellect, ethics, and ego. What I found fascinating is how the film doesn't villainize him outright. Instead, it presents him as a mirror to Elias, someone whose drive is untempered by reflection, highlighting the ethical choices inherent in the pursuit of knowledge. One of the first major plot developments involves the decision to initiate a controlled experiment with the anomaly. This sequence is both visually and intellectually engaging. Elias, Mara, and a carefully selected team set up an array of instruments designed to measure, manipulate, and predict the anomaly's behavior. The film takes its time here, showing methodical preparation, calibration, and anticipation. I was struck by the attention to detail, the hum of machinery, the rhythm of monitors, the subtle interactions among team members, all contribute to a palpable tension that is cerebral rather than explosive. The result is an immersive experience that draws viewers into the cognitive and emotional stakes of the experiment. The first experiment yields partial success, along with unforeseen consequences. A subtle temporal distortion manifests, affecting both instruments and the environment in ways that defy initial predictions. The team witnesses phenomena that are both thrilling and disconcerting. Clocks oscillate unpredictably, particles appear to momentarily reverse trajectory, and subtle auditory anomalies, like a faint echoing hum, suggest that reality itself is bending. For me, this sequence resonates because it mirrors the literary technique of foreshadowing. Small, unusual events hint at larger consequences yet to unfold, creating tension and inviting attentive observation. Interpersonal dynamics continue to develop amid the scientific endeavor. Mara's cautious pragmatism contrasts with Elias's intellectual curiosity, and the friction is both collaborative and narrative-driving. In one scene, Mara questions the ethical implications of a potential escalation, reminding Elias that their work could have profound societal consequences. He responds with a mixture of excitement and hesitation, revealing both his ambition and his internal conflict. These moments are essential because they humanize the high-concept science, anchoring speculative ideas in lived, relatable experience. The film is as much about the choices of its characters as it is about the anomaly they study. The narrative tension heightens with the introduction of unexpected external pressures. Rian Voss begins lobbying for accelerated experimentation, subtly manipulating public perception and team morale. His interventions inject urgency and ethical ambiguity into the plot. The characters are forced to balance personal ambition, collective responsibility, and the potentially catastrophic implications of their work. I was particularly drawn to how these sequences blend political, ethical, and scientific stakes, creating a multidimensional narrative that rewards reflection and analysis. Midway through this section, the anomaly's behavior becomes more erratic. Temporal distortions manifest in increasingly unpredictable ways, affecting both equipment and human perception. There's a striking sequence where team members experience brief, disorienting temporal shifts. A watch reverses, voices echo with delay, and a lab environment appears to fracture momentarily. These events are handled with subtle visual effects rather than spectacle. Flickering lights, altered frame rates, and mirrored reflections convey dislocation and suspense. From a critical standpoint, this is fascinating. The film externalizes internal and ethical tension through environmental and perceptual cues, creating a cinematic language that mirrors literary techniques of unreliable narration and layered perception. The first half of the plot also takes time to deepen secondary character arcs. Mara confronts a past failure that informs her cautious approach, while Elias wrestles with the consequences of prioritizing discovery over personal relationships. Even minor characters, lab assistants, technicians, and analysts, are afforded moments that reveal motivation, concern, or moral orientation. These details are essential for creating a believable world, one in which intellectual pursuit intersects with personal history, ambition, and ethical responsibility. I found this approach particularly satisfying because it mirrors literary character building. Every individual, no matter how peripheral, contributes to thematic resonance and narrative depth. The climax of this portion of the story occurs during a high-stakes experiment designed to probe the anomaly's limits. The team's meticulous preparation is contrasted with the anomaly's inherent unpredictability. Instruments react erratically, alarms sound, and a palpable sense of temporal instability sweeps the lab. The cinematography, with shifting camera angles, deliberate framing, and controlled pacing, mirrors the tension, creating an immersive experience that is simultaneously intellectual and visceral. For me, the brilliance lies in the restraint. Rather than relying solely on spectacle, the scene conveys suspense through anticipation, cognitive stakes, and ethical uncertainty. A subtle narrative twist emerges as the team discovers that the anomaly may have implications beyond mere temporal disturbance. It could influence memory, perception, and causality in unexpected ways. This revelation escalates both intellectual and emotional stakes, compelling characters to re-evaluate assumptions, ethics, and priorities. The interplay of discovery and uncertainty mirrors the structure of a philosophical novel. Understanding is always provisional, and every insight carries ethical and practical consequences. The film uses these plot developments to heighten engagement without sacrificing depth, a technique that felt both rare and deeply satisfying. By the conclusion of this section, the narrative has established multiple threads: Elias's intellectual journey, Mara's ethical vigilance, Voss's ambitious manipulation, and the anomaly's unpredictable behavior. Each thread is carefully interwoven, with foreshadowing, character interplay, and escalating tension laying the groundwork for subsequent developments. Importantly, the film balances clarity with mystery. Viewers are given enough information to understand stakes and dynamics, yet uncertainty remains, compelling reflection and anticipation. I found this balance reminiscent of intricate literary plotting, where exposition and revelation are paced to reward attentive and thoughtful engagement. Throughout this section, the film's tone remains reflective, intellectual, and emotionally nuanced. Suspense is generated as much by moral, ethical, and cognitive stakes as by visual spectacle. The cinematography, sound design, and narrative rhythm are all aligned to create a cohesive aesthetic experience that invites observation, reflection, and intellectual engagement. Even amidst scientific marvels and temporal anomalies, the story remains fundamentally human, a meditation on curiosity, responsibility, and the profound complexity of action and consequence. Finally, what distinguishes this portion of the story is its layering of personal, scientific, and ethical stakes. Elias's ambition is both admirable and fraught. Mara's caution is principled, yet humanly imperfect. Voss's charisma masks ethical ambiguity. The anomaly itself serves as a mirror for human curiosity and hubris, challenging characters and viewers alike to consider the consequences of knowledge pursued without reckoning. As I experienced this unfolding, I found myself reflecting on my own ambitions, ethical decisions, and the interplay between knowledge and responsibility, the hallmark of a story that resonates deeply and invites contemplation beyond the immediate narrative. By the end of this segment, the story has established a complex, multi-layered foundation. Characters are compelling, stakes are high, and intellectual tension is tangible. The narrative has woven together personal drama, ethical dilemmas, and speculative scientific exploration in a way that is immersive, intellectually stimulating, and emotionally resonant. For those who love literature, philosophical inquiry, and reflective cinema, this portion of the plot functions as both a narrative introduction and an invitation to ponder deeper questions about ambition, ethics, consequence, and the human experience of discovery. As the narrative unfolds beyond its initial mysteries, the stakes for Dr. Elias Eddington and his colleagues deepen, and the once methodical rhythm of the lab gives way to a tension that is at once intellectual, emotional, and existential. The first sequences in this stage of the story are quieter, reflective, almost deceptive in their calm, yet they pulse with a sense of inevitability. Elias, still grappling with the anomaly's unpredictable behavior, begins to perceive subtle consequences that were not apparent during earlier experiments. There's a moment of almost meditative observation, where he watches the instruments oscillate, aware that each fluctuation carries implications far beyond mere scientific curiosity. The cinematography accentuates this awareness. Close-up shots of blinking monitors, reflective surfaces, and minute reactions in Elias's expressions build an immersive atmosphere of tension without resorting to overt spectacle. For me, this narrative patience is what makes the story resonate. The suspense arises from thought and anticipation rather than immediate action. The personal stakes intensify as Elias confronts the consequences of his prior choices. Interpersonal dynamics are no longer just background tension. They're central to the unfolding drama. Mara Lang, whose caution had previously tempered Elias's impulses, now finds herself in the difficult position of influencing decisions under mounting pressure. A particularly memorable scene depicts her pleading with Elias to reconsider the parameters of the next experiment. Her voice is calm but insistent, layered with both ethical reasoning and personal concern. Elias responds with a mixture of admiration, frustration, and introspection, revealing the depth of their connection and the moral complexity of his ambition. These character moments serve not only to humanize the narrative but to heighten suspense. Every action carries profound personal and cosmic consequences. As the team embarks on their next experiment, the narrative shifts into a more kinetic, visually dynamic mode, though it remains anchored in intellectual engagement. The anomaly exhibits behaviors that defy prediction, creating cascading effects on time perception and laboratory stability. Instruments display readings that fluctuate wildly. Temporal distortions ripple through the environment, causing subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in spatial relationships and human perception. One sequence lingers in memory for its understated brilliance. A pendulum swings out of sync with the surrounding environment, shadows warp, and Elias's expression reflects both exhilaration and fear. Here, the film excels at translating abstract, scientific phenomena into tangible, emotionally resonant experience. As someone fascinated by how abstract concepts can be dramatized, I found this sequence particularly compelling. It turns theoretical physics into visceral narrative tension. The narrative's ethical dimension becomes increasingly pronounced. Rian Voss, who had earlier championed rapid advancement and risk-taking, escalates pressure on the team to exploit the anomaly for potential gain. These scenes are carefully constructed to explore power dynamics, persuasion, and moral compromise. Voss is charismatic, articulate, and persuasive, making his influence both believable and unnerving. There is a memorable confrontation in which Elias must balance loyalty to his team, the ethical implications of the experiment, and the allure of discovery. The tension is multi-layered. It operates on intellectual, moral, and personal levels, creating a suspense that is both cerebral and emotional. I was drawn to these scenes because they highlight the intersection of ambition, ethics, and human psychology, emphasizing that the most compelling conflict often resides in the mind and heart rather than an external spectacle. A major twist emerges as the anomaly begins to manifest unexpected temporal effects on a broader scale. Small, initially subtle distortions escalate rapidly. Past and present seem to converge. Brief echoes of alternate outcomes appear, and the environment becomes increasingly unstable. A particularly striking scene depicts a momentary temporal loop, where an event repeats with slight variations, revealing different possibilities for action and consequence. The team experiences both wonder and anxiety, forced to adapt and reassess in real time. This narrative device is brilliant in how it dramatizes uncertainty and consequence, making the intangible nature of temporal disturbance palpable to the audience. It also deepens thematic exploration. Knowledge is provisional, and even the most precise calculations cannot fully anticipate the complexity of reality. As the anomaly's influence intensifies, character relationships are tested. Mara and Elias confront not only the anomaly's external effects, but also their own assumptions, fears, and desires. Their dialogue becomes more layered, reflecting growing intimacy, mutual respect, and the emotional cost of extraordinary responsibility. I was particularly moved by a sequence in which they navigate the lab amid cascading temporal distortions, their gestures, glances, and shared problem-solving reflecting both urgency and trust. The narrative uses these interpersonal moments to anchor the story's high-concept science in human experience, ensuring that viewers remain emotionally invested even amid extraordinary events. Simultaneously, Voss's role evolves. His ambition transforms from an external pressure into a central narrative force. Early charm gives way to moral rigidity, revealing both the seductive and dangerous aspects of untempered ambition. In one pivotal scene, he attempts to override procedural safeguards, sparking conflict that threatens both personal safety and the broader stability of the anomaly. The tension here is multidimensional. It involves immediate risk, ethical conflict, and the philosophical question of whether ends justify means. From a critical perspective, this layered conflict is one of the film's most successful elements. It keeps the audience engaged on cognitive, ethical, and emotional levels simultaneously. The narrative structure skillfully escalates stakes through a combination of environmental, ethical, and interpersonal pressure. Temporal distortions affect not only the lab, but also peripheral locations, suggesting consequences beyond the immediate setting. Subtle visual cues, warped reflections, repeated gestures, displaced objects reinforce the growing instability, creating a sense that the anomaly's effects are pervasive and unpredictable. The filmmakers achieve a rare balance here. Suspense is maintained without relying solely on spectacle, and intellectual engagement remains central to the experience. I found this approach deeply satisfying, as it mirrors the intricate pacing and tension-building found in the best speculative fiction literature. Midway through this sequence, the team uncovers evidence suggesting that the anomaly could influence causality itself, creating potential alternate timelines or outcomes. The revelation is both exhilarating and terrifying. Elias grapples with the ethical and personal implications. Could intervention prevent harm, or might it exacerbate unintended consequences? The narrative frames this not as abstract exposition, but through character experience. Dialogue, reaction, and physical engagement convey both intellectual and emotional stakes. For me, these sequences exemplify how high-concept science fiction can remain profoundly human, connecting speculative ideas to moral, emotional, and relational dimensions. A particularly striking moment occurs when Elias confronts a personal consequence of prior choices. A minor temporal fluctuation creates a scenario in which an event from his past, a regret, a lost relationship, momentarily resurfaces with tangible presence. The scene is handled with exquisite subtlety. Lighting, framing, and sound design create a sense of dislocation, while Elias's response is grounded, nuanced, and emotionally resonant. This moment reinforces the narrative's thematic core. Knowledge and discovery are inseparable from human experience, and scientific ambition cannot be disentangled from ethical and personal consequence. It is a reminder, for me, of how storytelling can bridge speculative and intimate domains, making abstract ideas viscerally felt. As the plot advances toward climax, tension reaches both intellectual and emotional peaks. The anomaly's behavior becomes increasingly unpredictable, forcing rapid, high-stakes decision-making. Instruments fluctuate wildly, environmental cues become disorienting, and the team must act with precision under conditions that defy ordinary understanding. The cinematography mirrors this chaos, employing shifting angles, subtle frame distortions, and controlled pacing to convey disorientation and urgency. Yet the narrative remains coherent. Every event, gesture, and reaction is meaningful, layered with ethical and emotional implication. I was particularly impressed by how the film translates complex scientific and philosophical concepts into visual and experiential language without sacrificing narrative clarity. Key plot twists compound the suspense. The anomaly, initially considered a controllable scientific phenomenon, begins to exhibit quasi-sentient behavior, responding to ethical decisions and emotional states of the team members. This revelation reframes the narrative. It is no longer solely about observation or manipulation, but about responsibility, insight, and moral alignment. Characters must negotiate not only intellectual challenges, but also ethical and emotional landscapes. The tension is immersive. Viewers are compelled to consider not only what the anomaly does, but why, and how human choices shape the unfolding reality. The climactic sequences are meticulously choreographed, combining intellectual tension, emotional resonance, and narrative resolution. Elias and Mara coordinate complex interventions to stabilize the anomaly while simultaneously navigating interpersonal and ethical stakes. High-risk maneuvers, rapid recalibration of instruments, and real-time decision-making create a kinetic tension that is thrilling yet grounded in character-driven stakes. Every moment is consequential, and the narrative never loses sight of the human dimension amid the extraordinary. For me, this combination of cerebral challenge and emotional engagement exemplifies storytelling at its most compelling. Resolution is both satisfying and contemplative. The anomaly is stabilized but not entirely neutralized, a reminder that knowledge, power, and discovery are never absolute. Characters emerge transformed. Elias has gained not only intellectual insight, but a deeper understanding of ethical responsibility and human connection. Mara's steadfast caution and moral grounding are validated. Voss's ambition is tempered by confrontation with consequence. The film resists tidy closure, instead offering reflection, resonance, and space for ongoing contemplation. I found this particularly effective. It mirrors the ambiguity and complexity of real intellectual and ethical inquiry, where answers are provisional and reflection continues beyond the immediate narrative. Visual and thematic motifs are threaded through the climax and resolution. Reflections, oscillating pendulums, and mirrored surfaces recur, reinforcing ideas of perception, causality, and ethical reflection. Subtle temporal shifts in lighting, shadow, and frame rate underscore the anomaly's influence while mirroring characters' internal states. Sound design, rhythmic hums, low-frequency vibrations, and tonal shifts accentuate suspense, emotional tension, and narrative weight. From a critical perspective, these elements exemplify the film's integrated approach to storytelling. Narrative, theme, character, and cinematic technique are inseparable, each amplifying the other. The narrative's denouement also provides closure for secondary arcs. Minor characters' contributions are acknowledged. Ethical dilemmas are revisited in reflective moments. Relationships are subtly reaffirmed or redefined. These sequences are quiet yet resonant, allowing viewers to appreciate the consequences of action, the endurance of trust, and the human capacity for adaptation. The film demonstrates, through these character resolutions, that even in speculative or high-concept narratives, attention to human experience and relational complexity is essential for emotional satisfaction. Ultimately, the second half of the plot achieves a balance between spectacle and reflection, action and ethics, cognition and emotion. The anomaly serves as both narrative engine and thematic mirror, revealing human strengths, weaknesses, and responsibilities. Characters' choices reverberate outward, shaping not only immediate outcomes, but the intellectual and moral landscape of the story. I was particularly moved by how the narrative consistently ties speculative concepts to lived experience, creating a story that is intellectually stimulating, emotionally resonant, and morally provocative. In these sequences, suspense is generated not merely through temporal distortion or scientific risk, but through moral and cognitive uncertainty. Elias's decisions, Mara's interventions, and Voss's ambition intersect in ways that challenge the audience to consider ethical responsibility, ambition, and the unforeseen consequences of discovery. The narrative rewards attentive engagement. Repeated viewings reveal additional layers, from subtle foreshadowing to visual motifs, creating a rich tapestry of intellectual and emotional resonance. By the final sequences, the story emphasizes continuity and consequence. The anomaly's effects are stabilized, yet the narrative acknowledges the impossibility of absolute control or total understanding. The characters emerge with insight tempered by humility, aware that knowledge and action carry ongoing responsibility. The conclusion is both narratively satisfying and intellectually stimulating. It reinforces thematic exploration while allowing space for reflection, philosophical inquiry, and continued engagement. For viewers attuned to literature and intellectual exploration, this resolution exemplifies storytelling that respects both mind and heart. Dr. Elias Eddington is, without question, the linchpin of this story, a character whose intellectual brilliance is matched by his profound human complexity. From the very first moments, he is depicted not merely as a scientist navigating cosmic anomalies, but as a deeply introspective individual wrestling with personal ambition, ethical responsibility, and the emotional weight of past decisions. His observatory, a space of meticulous order and precise instruments, mirrors his mind, structured, disciplined, yet capable of wonder. Observing him, I felt an immediate resonance with the literary archetype of the contemplative genius, whose internal struggles are as compelling as external challenges. Elias's brilliance is inseparable from his vulnerabilities. Moments of doubt, regret, and ethical uncertainty reveal a layered personality that invites empathy and reflection. Early scenes emphasize Elias's duality, his extraordinary cognitive abilities and his emotional fragility. In one poignant sequence, he pauses over a photograph of a loved one while calibrating a delicate instrument, a gesture that quietly communicates both longing and the tension between personal connection and professional obsession. This juxtaposition between human vulnerability and intellectual rigor is a recurring motif throughout the narrative. I found myself drawn to it because it mirrors real human experience, the simultaneous pursuit of understanding and the desire for intimacy, a theme as prevalent in literature as in life. Mara Lang serves as both mirror and counterbalance to Elias. She is brilliant in her own right, a physicist whose precision and caution temper Elias's ambition. Their dynamic is complex. She challenges his assumptions, questions his ethical boundaries, and occasionally provokes the reflection necessary for him to reconsider choices. Yet her character is not a mere foil. Mara has depth, motivations, and a backstory that inform her decisions. Early in the story, we learn that she has experienced professional failure that left her wary of hubris and overreach. This history shapes her interactions, providing a moral compass while maintaining human vulnerability. Watching her navigate her professional and personal stakes, I felt that Mara exemplifies how secondary characters, when crafted with care, enrich both narrative and thematic resonance. Rian Voss, the industrialist, introduces an entirely different form of energy into the narrative. Charismatic, persuasive, and ambitious, he embodies the tension between intellect and ethics, ambition and responsibility. Voss's motivations are pragmatic, often bordering on self-interest, yet they are tempered by genuine curiosity and occasional flashes of insight. His character operates as both antagonist and narrative catalyst. He accelerates the plot by challenging procedural norms, pushing characters into ethically fraught decisions, and testing relational trust. I was fascinated by how the film renders him neither wholly villainous nor entirely sympathetic. Voss is a study in moral ambiguity, reflecting the real-world complexity of human ambition. The tension he introduces underscores the narrative's thematic concern with the consequences of power, choice, and ethical negotiation. Supporting characters, though less central, are treated with remarkable care. Lab assistants, technicians, and analysts each have small but meaningful moments that reveal personality, motivation, and reaction to the anomaly. One assistant, for example, quietly questions a procedural step, only to be gently corrected, highlighting both the hierarchical dynamics of the team and the intellectual rigor demanded by their work. These minor interactions are crucial, They create a sense of realism, contribute to world building, and emphasize that discovery is rarely solitary. Each character's personality, however subtly expressed, interacts with the anomaly and the central trio, producing cascading ethical and emotional effects. I found these details particularly compelling, as they mirror the nuanced layering often found in richly constructed novels. Elias's character arc is defined by tension between intellectual curiosity and moral responsibility. Early decisions, driven by a desire for knowledge, generate both breakthroughs and unintended consequences, forcing him to confront the ethical weight of his ambition. What I found compelling is how the narrative externalizes his internal struggles. The anomaly's unpredictable behavior mirrors his internal moral and intellectual dilemmas. In scenes where temporal distortions create minor chaos in the lab, Elias's reactions are carefully observed, revealing not panic, but cognitive engagement, ethical reflection, and emotional responsiveness. He is a protagonist who embodies the interplay of intellect, emotion, and moral judgment, making him compelling to both analytical and emotionally attuned viewers. Mara's arc intersects with Elias's, but her development is independent, rooted in her experiences, values, and responses to risk. She is cautious, empathetic, and morally principled, yet she's also humanly flawed. Moments of hesitation, frustration, or personal vulnerability remind us that her caution does not make her infallible. A particularly poignant sequence depicts her grappling with the potential consequences of an experiment, weighing intellectual curiosity against human cost. Her decision-making process is meticulous, revealing both intelligence and compassion, and providing a counterpoint to Elias's occasionally impetuous ambition. I was drawn to Mara's character because she exemplifies how ethical engagement and human empathy can coexist with intellectual rigor, offering a model of complexity often missing in traditional narrative archetypes. Voss's arc is intertwined with both Elias and Mara, but operates on a different trajectory. His ambition and pragmatic opportunism drive plot development and ethical tension. Early in the story, he encourages rapid experimentation, emphasizing potential prestige and profit. As events unfold, however, he confronts consequences of his own choices, failed interventions, ethical missteps, and the unpredictability of the anomaly challenge his assumptions. Voss is fascinating because he evolved from a seemingly confident, unrestrained figure into one forced to grapple with moral, intellectual, and existential consequences. Watching this evolution, I was reminded of literary characters whose hubris confronts reality, yielding nuanced reflection on ambition, ethics, and accountability. Secondary characters also contribute significantly to thematic resonance. For example, a laboratory analyst, initially cautious and observant, becomes central to a sequence where ethical choices must be made under temporal distortion. Their internal debate, fear, curiosity, loyalty, is rendered in microexpressions and subtle dialogue, demonstrating the narrative's commitment to humanizing even peripheral participants. These moments reinforce the film's core theme, that intellectual pursuit is inseparable from ethical consideration and emotional consequence. Even minor characters are afforded depth, creating a richly interwoven tapestry of relational dynamics and philosophical inquiry. The anomaly itself functions as a quasi-character, shaping behavior, decision-making, and ethical reflection. Its unpredictable influence mirrors the internal and relational dynamics of the human characters, serving as both catalyst and mirror. The narrative consistently emphasizes that interaction with the anomaly is not merely scientific, but profoundly ethical. Human choices determine consequences as much as the phenomenon itself. From a critical perspective, the anomaly is a narrative device that externalizes moral and cognitive tension, creating a multi-layered story where character, theme, and speculative concept are inseparable. I found this particularly compelling because it demonstrates how character-driven storytelling can coexist with high-concept science fiction without sacrificing depth or emotional resonance. Elias's emotional and moral evolution is intertwined with relational dynamics. His bond with Mara deepens as they navigate ethical dilemmas and temporal instability together. Moments of shared problem-solving, subtle glances, and collaborative decision-making reveal trust, respect, and emerging intimacy. These interactions are not romanticized. Rather, they emphasize relational ethics, mutual intellectual engagement, and emotional interdependence. For me, this depiction resonates because it mirrors real-life collaborations where shared responsibility, mutual trust, and ethical deliberation form the basis of deep connection. Voss's interactions with both Elias and Mara reveal tension, negotiation, and moral challenge. He embodies the external pressure of ambition untempered by ethical reflection, forcing protagonists to confront not only scientific uncertainty but human complexity. His presence raises fundamental questions. How do individuals act when confronted with high-stakes knowledge and ethical ambiguity? To what extent does charisma, authority, or ambition influence decision-making? The narrative explores these questions without didacticism, allowing viewers to engage intellectually and morally. Observing Voss's impact, I reflected on similar dynamics in human institutions, leadership, and collaborative ventures, highlighting the story's capacity to resonate beyond its speculative framework. Minor characters' arcs also mirror thematic concerns. A technician's hesitation during an experiment, a lab assistant's ethical caution, or an observer's curiosity all contribute to narrative tension and ethical reflection. These arcs emphasize that responsibility is collective. Even minor participants influence outcomes and confront moral dilemmas. This narrative choice enhances both realism and thematic depth, illustrating that ethical engagement, intellectual rigor, and human interdependence are fundamental to both discovery and narrative resonance. Costuming, physicality, and performance choices further enrich character analysis. Elias's meticulous attire, deliberate gestures, and contemplative expressions convey discipline, focus, and cognitive engagement. Mara's posture, eye contact, and measured movements reflect caution, attentiveness, and ethical reflection. Voss's confident stride, expressive hand gestures, and controlled tone communicate charisma, authority, and moral ambiguity. These visual cues are integral to understanding character. The film conveys personality, internal state, and relational dynamics not only through dialogue, but through carefully considered physical and performative choices. The narrative also uses spatial relationships to reinforce character development. Elias often occupies the center of visual frames during moments of intellectual focus, emphasizing his central role in the narrative and in decision-making. Mara is frequently positioned in relation to him, reflecting both collaboration and tension. Voss's positioning, often peripheral or intrusive, underscores his role as instigator and moral provocateur. These visual techniques subtly communicate relational dynamics, cognitive tension, and narrative hierarchy, enriching character analysis for viewers attuned to both literary and cinematic nuance. Throughout the story, ethical dilemmas function as a key lens for understanding character. Elias's brilliance is inseparable from his ethical contemplation. Decisions about experiments, intervention, and responsibility reveal the intersection of intellect and morality. Mara's caution, empathy, and principled action highlight relational and ethical stakes, providing a foil and complement to Elias. Voss's ambition challenges ethical boundaries, offering tension, reflection, and narrative propulsion. Minor characters' choices further underscore collective responsibility and the human dimension of discovery. Observing these dynamics, I was struck by how character analysis extends beyond psychology to encompass ethics, relationality, and intellectual engagement, a rare narrative richness in speculative storytelling. The anomaly's role as an ethical and cognitive mirror amplifies character insight. Each individual's reaction, fear, curiosity, caution, or hubris, is magnified by temporal and perceptual distortions, revealing strengths, weaknesses, and moral orientation. Elias confronts his ambition and vulnerability, Mara balances caution and courage. Voss negotiates desire and ethical compromise. Minor characters navigate uncertainty and consequence, reflecting broader human experience. I found this portrayal particularly compelling, as it demonstrates how speculative narrative devices can illuminate ethical, emotional, and intellectual dimensions of character without sacrificing realism or depth. In conclusion, the characters of this story are remarkable for their depth, ethical complexity, and relational nuance. Elias embodies intellectual brilliance, moral reflection, and emotional vulnerability. Mara complements him with ethical vigilance, intellectual rigor, and human empathy. Voss introduces ambition, charisma, and moral ambiguity, challenging protagonists and narrative assumptions. Minor characters, while less central, contribute meaningfully to narrative tension, ethical reflection, and relational dynamics. The anomaly itself functions as a quasi-character, externalizing cognitive, ethical, and emotional tension. Collectively, these elements create a rich, multi-layered tapestry of human experience, intellectual engagement, and ethical inquiry. For viewers with literary sensibilities, the story rewards careful observation, reflection, and engagement, offering a compelling study of character in both speculative and deeply human contexts. The making of Eddington 2025 was as layered and intricate as the narrative itself, filled with anecdotes, peculiar occurrences, and details that most viewers would never glimpse beyond the polished screen. One of the earliest behind-the-scenes stories involves the design of Elias Eddington's observatory. The production team insisted on building a fully functional set, complete with operational instruments, flickering screens, and calibrated telescopic devices. Unlike typical movie sets, which rely on static props or simulated displays, these instruments were real, and their precision required a small team of scientific consultants to ensure the accuracy of every dial, graph, and readout. During filming, there were moments when the actors had to perform in near-complete darkness, relying on minimal lighting to capture the subtle reflections and shadows necessary for the intended atmospheric tension. Crew members often recall that these conditions created both unique cinematic opportunities and unexpected challenges, such as actors accidentally triggering a sequence of screens that would reboot mid-shot, creating both frustration and impromptu improvisation. A particularly curious incident occurred during one of the first experiments shown on screen. The production had set up a sequence where simulated temporal distortions would ripple through the lab using both lighting effects and practical set design. During a test run, a combination of mirrored surfaces, flickering light panels, and reflective instrumentation created an unintended visual anomaly that appeared far more dramatic than originally envisioned. The director and cinematographer, initially concerned about continuity errors, quickly realized that the accidental effect added an eerie realism to the scene. Rather than removing it, they adjusted the shot list and lighting cues to incorporate this happy accident, demonstrating how improvisation on set sometimes enhanced the intended visual storytelling. Actors themselves contributed fascinating quirks to production. The lead, portraying Elias, insisted on personally interacting with the instruments during rehearsal, sometimes recalibrating dials or adjusting screens in ways that were not scripted. While this occasionally caused delays, the production team noticed that these interactions added authenticity to his performance. Mara Lang's actress, conversely, developed a habit of sketching diagrams and notes on the margins of her script, a ritualistic practice that mirrored her character's analytical and cautious nature. These personal touches, small and often unnoticed by audiences, infused the performances with nuanced authenticity, lending credibility to the character's intellectual gravitas. There were also unexpected occurrences on location shoots, particularly in the sequences depicting temporal anomalies extending beyond the lab. One notable example occurred during a forest scene intended to illustrate subtle temporal disruptions in a natural environment. The production had employed practical effects to create minor disturbances, falling leaves, rippling water, and light distortions. Unexpectedly, a sudden gust of wind interacted with the set, moving elements in ways that were unplanned yet visually compelling. The director chose to retain much of the footage, finding that the real-world randomness complemented the controlled cinematic illusion of temporal flux, blending natural chaos with meticulous design. The film's sound design also carries a collection of peculiar stories. For sequences involving temporal distortions, the sound team experimented with unconventional recording techniques. In one instance, they recorded the resonances of large glass structures and altered playback speeds to produce subtle echoes that would mimic distorted perception. At times, the effect was so immersive that actors reportedly reacted instinctively to auditory cues, adjusting movements or expressions as if they were responding to actual phenomena rather than staged cues. The collaboration between sound and performance in these moments highlights the film's integrated approach to creating an experiential reality, where sensory manipulation and narrative converge to enhance viewer immersion. Lighting design contributed equally strange and fascinating behind-the-scenes tales. The cinematographer favored practical lighting over digital effects for many interior sequences, using adjustable lamps, reflective panels, and filtered beams to create the illusion of fluctuating temporal conditions. On several occasions, the light sources themselves malfunctioned or behaved unpredictably, casting irregular shadows that initially caused concern but ultimately contributed to the unsettling atmosphere desired for the scenes. Crew members often recall that troubleshooting these moments became an exercise in creativity, as the team worked to maintain narrative continuity while embracing unplanned visual anomalies. Costume and prop design carried their own curiosities. Elias's meticulously tailored wardrobe included subtle asymmetries and fabric textures that only became apparent under specific lighting conditions, intended to mirror his complex internal state. Mara's clothing incorporated hidden pockets and functional design elements inspired by real scientific attire, allowing her actress to interact more naturally with props and instruments. The attention to these micro-details extended to the anomaly's representation. Reflective surfaces, suspended pendulums, and small objects in the lab were carefully chosen or modified to exaggerate subtle movements, creating a sense of otherworldly instability that heightened both realism and dramatic tension. One particularly unusual anecdote involves the scheduling of scenes to coincide with actual astronomical events. During filming, the production team arranged several exterior shots of the observatory against the night sky to capture authentic celestial lighting. On one night, the predicted alignment of a planet with a distant star occurred exactly as planned, creating a visual effect that matched the narrative's cosmic tension. Crew members recalled the surreal experience of watching this celestial phenomenon in real time, blending natural wonder with cinematic illusion. The event's serendipity reinforced the thematic connection between human endeavor and the broader universe, lending a layer of authenticity that would have been difficult to replicate artificially. The actors also faced peculiar challenges related to performance under abstract conditions. Scenes requiring interaction with the anomaly, often involving imagined or partially rendered elements, demanded precise eye lines, gestures, and timing. To achieve this, stand-ins, markers, and pre-visualized animations were used, yet even with these aids, the actors frequently improvised reactions to unexpected cues, creating nuanced, spontaneous moments. The director encouraged this improvisation, recognizing that authentic responses to intangible phenomena would enhance the audience's suspension of disbelief. These sequences became a subtle dance between preparation and spontaneity, mirroring the narrative's interplay of control and unpredictability. Another curious aspect of production involved the editing process. Given the temporal and perceptual distortions central to the story, editors experimented with unconventional frame rates, layering, and pacing to convey shifts in causality and perception. In several test sequences, a mismatch in speed between audio and visual tracks produced an effect that was initially considered a mistake. Upon review, however, The director realized that the dissonance effectively conveyed temporal disorientation, and the technique was intentionally incorporated into several key sequences. This willingness to embrace accidents and reinterpret them as creative opportunities reflects the film's broader philosophy of exploration, both within the narrative and behind the scenes. Technical advisors, many of them physicists and temporal theorists, contributed stories of frustration and fascination. They were consulted to ensure the depiction of anomalies remained plausible within the speculative framework. Occasionally, their suggestions led to unexpected demands on set design or filming techniques. For example, a recommendation regarding the visual representation of temporal looping required the construction of a rotating platform and mirrored surfaces to capture subtle environmental shifts. While logistically complex, the resulting sequences added a tangible, almost hypnotic authenticity to the anomaly's manifestation. Crew members frequently marveled at the combination of intellectual rigor and cinematic creativity required to translate abstract, scientific ideas into visual storytelling. Even minor technical malfunctions during filming produced memorable anecdotes. At one point, a key lighting rig overheated mid-shoot, causing brief interruptions. The team improvised, using handheld lights and reflective surfaces to continue filming while maintaining continuity. In the process, several shots gained a raw, unexpected texture that the director decided to retain. Similar incidents with monitors, holographic props, and movable set pieces created visual anomalies that were repurposed as narrative enhancements, demonstrating a creative responsiveness to unforeseen circumstances. Another behind-the-scenes oddity involved the handling of continuity in temporal sequences. Multiple takes often required actors and crew to recreate movements and interactions with extreme precision. On several occasions, the sequence of gestures or reactions was subtly altered due to unexpected environmental factors, forcing improvisation and meticulous attention to detail. These challenges were compounded by the presence of reflective surfaces and mirrored props, which could inadvertently capture crew reflections or unintended lighting variations. The production team developed ingenious methods to maintain both visual integrity and narrative coherence, often turning logistical complexity into a narrative advantage. Even catering and day-to-day logistics produced stories worth noting. Crew members recounted that during long night shoots, meals and breaks had to be carefully timed to avoid interfering with continuity, especially when sequences involved subtle lighting or reflective elements. Anecdotes abound of crew members navigating darkened corridors with flashlights, balancing props, and maintaining silence to prevent accidental noise from disturbing delicate sound recording. These seemingly mundane details highlight the dedication required to sustain the film's immersive environment, emphasizing how every layer of production contributes to the narrative experience. Practical effects, particularly those representing temporal distortions, produced both intended and unintended marvels. Suspended objects, manipulated air currents, and precise lighting shifts occasionally interacted in unpredictable ways. One sequence involving a pendulum and reflective floor created a brief, ethereal double shadow effect, enhancing the illusion of temporal splitting. This effect was never anticipated in planning, but was embraced for its aesthetic and narrative resonance. Such moments illustrate the film's ongoing interplay between meticulous design and serendipitous accident, blurring the line between careful planning and spontaneous creativity. Even the digital elements carry unusual backstories. The CGI team collaborated closely with cinematographers to ensure seamless integration of visual anomalies with practical effects. Early renderings, however, produced surreal distortions that initially seemed unusable. After experimentation, the team realized that these exaggerated effects could serve as stylistic markers for specific sequences, signaling moments of heightened temporal instability. By embracing these digital anomalies, the film created a layered visual language that both communicates narrative meaning and delights the attentive viewer with subtle, unexpected details. In sum, the production of this story was rife with curiosities, improvisations, and creative problem-solving. From a construction of fully functional observatory sets to serendipitous visual effects, from actor improvisations to unexpected environmental interactions, the making of the film mirrors the narrative's themes of unpredictability, discovery, and ethical engagement. Every detail, technical, performative, or accidental, contributes to a richly textured cinematic experience that is both intellectually stimulating and visually compelling. The film's behind-the-scenes tapestry reveals that storytelling is rarely linear. Rather, it is a dynamic interplay of preparation, improvisation, and responsiveness to the unexpected. Watching these stories unfold, I was reminded that the magic of cinema is as much about the creative process as it is about the finished product, where ingenuity, accident, and dedication converge to produce moments that resonate long after the credits roll. As I reflect on the pivotal events of this narrative, I am drawn first to the quiet moments, the understated sequences that carry enormous critical weight precisely because of their subtlety. The film excels in weaving together intellectual tension, ethical inquiry, and emotional resonance, and it is often in these seemingly simple interactions that the most significant thematic threads emerge. Consider the initial anomaly observation scene. On the surface, a procedural experiment with precise measurements and technical calibration. Yet beneath this, there's a layered interplay of trust, anticipation, and ethical questioning. The tension is not generated solely by the anomaly itself, but by the human response to it. And this is where the film distinguishes itself. Watching Elias Eddington meticulously examine the instruments, while Mara Lang quietly challenges his assumptions, the viewer is invited to consider not just what is happening, but why it matters and what it reveals about the character's moral and intellectual landscapes. This dual lens of observation, scientific and ethical, is central to the film's critical impact. From a theoretical standpoint, the film consistently positions events as mirrors of human inquiry and consequence. The temporal distortions, for instance, are never merely spectacle. They function as narrative devices that foreground philosophical questions. Early sequences depicting minor anomalies, oscillating pendulums, shifting shadows, subtle instrument misreadings, encourage the audience to consider the fragility of perception, the limits of control, and the ethical weight of discovery. Critics with a focus on narrative construction would note how these sequences establish the groundwork for both suspense and reflection. Small disturbances accumulate meaningfully, preparing the audience for the larger consequences that follow. The film's use of pacing here is notable. Moments of calm, reflection, and dialogue are interspersed with sequences of escalating tension, creating a rhythm that mirrors human cognitive processing and ethical deliberation. I found this particularly resonant, as it demonstrates that critical engagement can be both intellectual and emotional, inviting viewers to inhabit the character's dilemma fully. One of the most striking events, from both a narrative and critical perspective, is the laboratory crisis that occurs as the anomaly begins to exhibit quasi-sentience. Objects shift unpredictably, instruments display readings that defy expectation, and time itself seems to fluctuate in subtle but disorienting ways. On one level, this is an extraordinary technical and visual achievement. Cinematographically, the sequences employ reflective surfaces, layered lighting, and precise framing to create an immersive experience. But the critical significance lies in the ethical and philosophical implications. Characters must make split-second decisions that weigh intellectual curiosity against potential harm. Elias and Mara's choices during these sequences reveal not just their professional competence, but their moral reasoning, and this dual focus enhances the narrative's thematic depth. As a viewer, I was struck by how the film transforms abstract scientific speculation into a lived ethical experience, a hallmark of thoughtful speculative storytelling. The narrative escalation is carefully calibrated, ensuring that critical reflection accompanies every plot development. For example, when Rian Voss attempts to override procedural safeguards, the tension is both external and internal. The external threat is immediate and tangible, but the internal conflict, ethical, relational, and intellectual, is far more compelling. The film frames these events not as black and white moral dilemmas, but as complex negotiations of ambition, responsibility, and consequence. This approach invites a sophisticated critical perspective. One must consider not just plot mechanics, but character motivation, relational dynamics, and the broader philosophical questions invoked. The scene's impact on reception is significant. Audiences are compelled to reflect on personal and societal values, making the film not merely entertainment, but an intellectual and ethical provocation. Another moment of profound critical resonance occurs when temporal loops are first revealed. Objects, gestures, and interactions repeat with slight variations, creating a sense of both wonder and disorientation. From a literary perspective, this is a brilliant exploration of causality and contingency, evoking classic speculative themes while grounding them in character-driven drama. Elias's responses are central here. His attempts to interpret the loops, adjust variables, and anticipate outcomes are not merely technical exercises, but acts of ethical reasoning and emotional negotiation. Mara's interventions provide counterbalance, emphasizing relational ethics and moral vigilance. From a thematic standpoint, these sequences underscore the interplay between human agency and unpredictability, reflecting the narrative's ongoing concern with responsibility in the face of knowledge. As a viewer with a literary sensibility, I found these sequences especially compelling, as they transform high-concept science fiction into a meditation on human choice, consequence, and relational trust. The climactic confrontation with the anomaly is equally significant from a critical viewpoint. The narrative escalates both visually and intellectually. Instruments oscillate, environmental distortions ripple across the lab, and characters must coordinate complex interventions under extreme uncertainty. The genius of these sequences lies in their simultaneity. Spectacle and reflection coexist. Cinematographic choices, rapid yet precise cuts, shifting camera angles, subtle distortions in lighting and frame, convey both the chaos of temporal instability and the cognitive and emotional strain on characters. The ethical dimension remains central. Every action, decision, and hesitation carries potential consequence, reinforcing the film's thematic insistence that knowledge and power are inseparable from moral responsibility. Observing this, I was struck by how the film aligns narrative structure, visual language, and ethical inquiry into a unified experiential whole, heightening its critical impact. Secondary narrative events also contribute significantly to thematic resonance. Minor experiments, character interactions, and even accidental occurrences, such as reflections or subtle timing discrepancies, are woven into the broader narrative fabric, demonstrating that attention to detail enhances both intellectual engagement and emotional immersion. The anomaly's unpredictable effects on secondary characters amplify the film's exploration of human response to uncertainty, emphasizing that ethical and cognitive stakes extend beyond central protagonists. These narrative choices contribute to the film's reception among audiences and critics attuned to layered storytelling, as they reward careful observation and sustained reflection. The film's critical depth is further enhanced by its handling of relational dynamics during moments of crisis. Elias and Mara's collaboration is a study in trust, respect, and moral negotiation. Their dialogue, gestures, and coordinated interventions are meticulously crafted, allowing viewers to witness both intellectual problem-solving and ethical deliberation in real time. Critics have noted that this dual focus is unusual in high-concept science fiction, which often privileges spectacle over relational nuance. By foregrounding collaboration and moral reasoning alongside temporal instability, the film encourages viewers to engage on multiple levels: cognitive, emotional, and ethical. I personally found these sequences illuminating, as they demonstrate that narrative tension can be generated as effectively by moral ambiguity and relational negotiation as by external threat or visual spectacle. One of the film's most subtle yet profound critical achievements is its use of visual and auditory motifs to reinforce thematic inquiry. Reflective surfaces, oscillating instruments, and layered lighting create visual echoes of the anomaly's effects, while sound design, subtle hums, shifts in pitch, and temporal distortions, heightens both suspense and cognitive engagement. These motifs function not merely as aesthetic devices, but as narrative commentary, suggesting the interdependence of perception, action, and consequence. From a critical perspective, this integration of sensory and narrative elements exemplifies the film's intellectual ambition. It is not content to depict phenomena, but seeks to immerse viewers in the ethical, emotional, and cognitive dimensions of experience. Voss's narrative trajectory provides an additional layer for critical analysis. His ambition and ethical flexibility serve as counterpoints to Elias and Mara's deliberative approach, generating tension and catalyzing pivotal events. Importantly, Voss's character is rendered with complexity. He is neither purely villainous nor wholly sympathetic, but a nuanced study in the allure and risk of ambition. His interventions force reflection on broader societal and ethical questions. The consequences of unchecked ambition, the tension between discovery and morality, and the human tendency to prioritize personal gain over collective responsibility. These events resonate critically because they mirror real-world dilemmas, making the narrative both speculative and profoundly relevant. Several sequences explore the narrative consequences of error and improvisation. Minor miscalculations, unanticipated environmental effects, and spontaneous interventions create cascading results that illuminate the precariousness of knowledge and control. The narrative consistently links these occurrences to ethical reflection. Every unplanned effect prompts moral and relational deliberation, emphasizing that intellectual pursuit is inseparable from responsibility. From a critical standpoint, this treatment of contingency is sophisticated, allowing the film to explore unpredictability not merely as a plot device, but as a lens for ethical and emotional inquiry. The interplay of suspense, reflection, and consequence is particularly evident in sequences depicting temporal feedback loops. The loops serve as both plot engine and thematic mirror, revealing character strengths, weaknesses, and moral orientation. Elias's intellectual dexterity is tested against the anomaly's unpredictability. Mara's ethical vigilance is challenged by ambiguity, and Voss's ambition confronts consequence. Each loop is a microcosm of narrative and ethical interplay, illustrating the film's central thesis. Knowledge, power, and moral responsibility are inseparable. I found these sequences particularly engaging because they demonstrate that speculative narrative can explore high-concept science while remaining deeply human and intellectually provocative. The resolution is equally significant in critical terms. The anomaly stabilization is achieved not through brute force or technological mastery alone, but through collaborative ethical reasoning, relational trust, and cognitive engagement. Characters emerge transformed. Elias has gained insight tempered by ethical reflection. Mara's caution and moral rigor are validated, and Voss is confronted with the consequences of unrestrained ambition. The narrative resists simplistic closure, instead inviting contemplation and ongoing reflection, a choice that enhances both thematic depth and critical reception. Viewers are left considering not only the events themselves, but their ethical and philosophical implications, underscoring the film's resonance as both story and intellectual exploration. Thematic resonance is reinforced through carefully layered narrative motifs. Repeated visual cues, pendulums, reflections, oscillating instruments serve as both plot markers and philosophical symbols, emphasizing themes of perception, consequence, and moral deliberation. Sound motifs underscore tension and cognitive engagement, creating a holistic sensory experience that complements the narrative's ethical and intellectual complexity. Critically, these choices illustrate the film's commitment to integrated storytelling. Narrative, theme, character, and cinematic technique coalesce to produce a work that engages viewers on multiple planes simultaneously. Even secondary events, such as minor experiments, procedural adjustments, and character interactions, contribute meaningfully to thematic and ethical resonance. Each occurrence, however subtle, reinforces the narrative's core inquiry into responsibility, perception, and consequence. From a critical perspective, the film's attention to these details elevates it beyond conventional science fiction, rewarding viewers who engage with narrative, philosophical, and ethical complexity. It is precisely this richness of detail that generates lasting impact and critical acclaim. The interplay of intellect, emotion, and ethical reflection in the film also enhances audience engagement and reception. By foregrounding relational dynamics alongside high-concept speculation, the narrative encourages viewers to invest cognitively and emotionally, creating a sustained immersive experience. Critics have observed that this approach differentiates the film from spectacle-driven counterparts, as it integrates moral and intellectual reflection into the core narrative rather than relegating it to incidental commentary. I found this integration especially compelling, as it demonstrates how storytelling can simultaneously challenge, provoke, and satisfy, blending speculative imagination with deeply human insight. Ultimately, the film's significant events, from minor laboratory disturbances to full-scale temporal anomalies, function as more than narrative milestones. Each event is carefully calibrated to provoke ethical reflection, illuminate character complexity, and explore thematic resonance. The interplay of spectacle, moral inquiry, and relational dynamics ensures that critical engagement is not only possible but unavoidable. As a viewer attuned to literature, philosophy, and speculative inquiry, I found these sequences profoundly satisfying. They invite contemplation, reward close observation, and challenge conventional expectations of narrative causality and consequence. From the very first day of shooting, the production of Eddington 2025 felt like stepping into a laboratory of creativity, where every decision, no matter how small, rippled outward to affect both narrative and cinematic experience. The filmmaking process was meticulously planned yet flexible, balancing the precision necessary for scientific authenticity with the improvisational spontaneity that often produces the most memorable cinematic moments. One of the most fascinating aspects of the production was the collaborative ethos among the crew. Cinematographers, set designers, sound engineers, and actors were encouraged not merely to execute instructions, but to contribute ideas, experiment with techniques, and challenge assumptions. I remember reading accounts of how the cinematographer would spend hours with actors and lighting technicians, exploring the interplay of shadows, reflective surfaces, and ambient lighting to convey the subtle temporal distortions